Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Cornelia Hansen. Hello, Cornelia.
Hi.
Now, you've written this great book called Kid Wheels. And
yes.
it's a really wonderful knitting together of, I guess, developmental psychology and astrology. And so, of course, I love it. And perhaps it might be nice if you could give us a little bit of background into what it is that prompted you to write this book and how you went about it.
Okay, one of the things that I've always wondered is why every child in a family is different. I mean, I had 4 children and they were all different. And I always wondered why, when you have the same family, the same genes and the same upbringing. And I heard another astrologer ask that question too. And it seems like it's a question that nobody had really addressed. So as an astrologer, I was looking through different articles, different books, trying to find an answer to my question. I couldn't. And at the same time, I was getting a master's degree in child development. So, and I was studying astrology at the same time. So I studied this idea about temperament in children. And I saw that in child development, it was just really required to understand the concepts because they were using these concepts to talk about how children's behavior and their emotional responding can be seen and measured. And I said, well, if they can see it and measure it, then I should be able to do that too for astrology. So I set up a program in the preschool I was working in at the time. I had 2 to 4-year-olds. And I got permission to do an experiment, and the district agreed to it. My supervisor said, okay, because I had a whole classroom here of 40 preschoolers from 2 to 4, and I knew that their birth certificates had to be at the center. So I designed this pattern of research where I would interview the parents with a sheet so they could answer my questions. And then I would get involved in setting up observation sheets so I could sit and observe children as they were playing. And I got my staff involved too. There was 2 teachers and 3 aides. And they were all very well trained in how to observe children because that was our job. And we had to give, twice a year, we had to give our summations of our findings and meet with the parents. So I discussed it all with them and they agreed to help me. And so we continued to do that. I don't know if you want to know all the little minor techniques that we use, but we had observation sheets and they could observe the children and mark down, and I had all of their parents' permission and I had their birth certificates. So I could set up a chart for each one of them. So after we finished all of our observations, and I could go through their charts and I could pick all the children. For instance, one of the components of temperament is activity level. So we could rate children high or medium or low in their activity levels. So then I could look at those charts, arrange them in kids who were marked high, medium, or low, and see what they had in common in their charts. And so I came up with signatures for what I would call every component in temperament. So I could translate that from a chart into saying, okay, well, this child is high in activity, low in activity. And I did that with all 8 components that I studied in temperament. So you get an overall picture, even as an infant. When they're born with the temperament, and you can already observe it. And so if you could look at a chart and say what this child's temperament, you have a lot of information you can give the parents on what to expect, how this child is going to behave. And try to give them some insight into parenting strategies that will work for them, you know, for a particular type of child. You have persistent children, you have distractible children, you have shy children, you have high activity children, low activities. And the whole theory behind it is called the goodness of fit. So if the child's temperament fits in with the environment, which is physical and social, then the development is going to progress in a normal way. But if you've got a child's temperament that doesn't fit with mom's temperament, there's going to be some difficulty there. Parents may try to change their child's temperament, repress it in some way. And that's where you develop problems. So if you're warned ahead of time and you understand that this baby's temperament is such, then you know how to handle them to get the best results.
Define temperament for us.
Temperament is the behavioral style of the child and their emotional way of responding. Some children, well, let's take a baby, for instance. Some babies, you can be nursing them and they'll be nursing along, but somebody walks into the room and the baby wants to know right away, who's that? Whereas another baby won't be distracted at all, will just keep on nursing. You see what I'm saying? So once you understand that, you understand, okay, this child is more persistent than this child. And how is that going to work out in their behavior? But that's what temperament is, the normal behavioral style of the child. And it consists of 9 different components, but I only researched 8 of them because one of them was only found in one type of child. So I didn't feel it was necessary to do it for all the other ones.
I like that you're looking at behavior that is already noticed in babies, and the idea of temperament being inherent in the child, which is what a chart would suggest anyway.
Yes.
It's a good thing because it's an understanding that the interaction with the environment and the inherent qualities of the child, the temperament, are what then develops as we go along. And it just made me think, listening to you, a really good illustration of this is with puppies, because they come from the same litter. So they have exactly the same exposures to environmental stimuli. And yet, not all the puppies will have the same temperament.
Right.
And behaviorists will say, well, if you're looking for a puppy who's confident, it's not necessarily that the puppy's going to run up to you, but it's how the puppy deals with new stimulus. So
Right.
that, for instance, if you put an umbrella in the room, how's the puppy going to react? Are they going to go straight to explore? Or are they going to hesitate, or are they going to hide? And already you can see, this is comparable to what you're describing there, the temperament of the puppy from early on. And I think it's a very good parallel as an example, because it shows the inherent nature, because there's, often, 7 in a seven in a litter. And so see that there's no question that this is inherent. And here you are talking about this with babies and children, which is exactly what we would expect from a nature chart.
Exactly. In fact, there's been a lot of research done with social animals, like dogs, like baboons, monkeys, etc. And you'll find that amongst monkeys, you'll see the same thing. You may see a shy monkey who clings to his mother and is not as aggressive as another one who's more outgoing, and he'll be more aggressive and able to function better than the child who's kind of like afraid and holds back,
And, this is great news for parents, because sometimes they're thinking, what have I done? And actually, there are some things
Yes.
which are apparent. However, the art of parenting is knowing what to do.
Yes, exactly.
And so this is where um, the where astrology comes in. So can you tell us a little bit about the area of the charts that you focused on as regards matching it to recognize temperament descriptions or definitions?
Well, I based everything on Stephen Arroyo's energy system, where he says that some people feed your energy field and you feel good around them. And there are other people that kind of repress your feelings and you get frustrated around them and you don't feel comfortable for some reason. It's hard to say why, isn't it? Who's feeding your temperament and who isn't. But that's especially true with children because they're so sensitive to their parents' response. What else did you want me to say? What was it?
Well, so you went to Stephen Arroyo's energy system.
Right, right.
And
And so then I looked at temperament. The first thing I did was create a temperament because everybody adds up all of the planets and what modes they're in and what elements they're in. But I wanted one that was more complete. So I did develop my own. I can't say that it's the only one. I'm just saying it's mine. I use that one. And then I could go to a particular thing, like let's look at overall mood. Okay. Overall mood of the child is that some babies are just naturally warm and outgoing and more friendly and they cry less. But there are other babies that are more fussy. They tend to cry more. They tend to be, as toddlers, more serious. So that's a difference in behavior. So what do we look at for emotions? We look at the moon. So I started looking at their moons and the relationships to the moon. So the ones that had, let's say, I had one child who had Mars conjunct the moon in Aries. Well, you could see that temperament or when she was a baby. I mean, she was when she was hungry, she just didn't lie and whimper. She just hollered and turned red face, And as she grew into a toddler, she would have these emotional reactions that were just over the top, which was difficult for the mother to handle. But I said, you know what, this is part of her temperament. And you're just going to have to understand that she has a strong energy level in her emotions. And later on, as she gets older, she'll learn how to control it more. But don't be upset by it. Just understand it, and if she's having a difficult time, you can always remove her from the area. So that was easy to kind of figure out. You could look at the chart and say, is this child more fire and air, or is this child more earth and water? And the percentages, because some children are not one or the other. They're kind of in between. Whatever the situation is, they'll respond to it emotionally in a normal way. Whereas some other kids are going to be more withdrawn and not show that outgoingness. And they have a difficult time sometimes because parents don't understand. I had two mothers come to a mommy and me class, and one little girl they were friends, these two mothers, and one little girl where she was just so outgoing and, oh, let's get on with whatever we're doing. She was but the little boy was like the same age. And the poor mother was so distraught. What am I doing wrong with him? He was whining and complaining and demanding and just so difficult. And I said, it's not your fault. She said, it isn't. I said, no, it's his temperament. You have a child that's more difficult to handle than the other one. I said, but it's okay. I'll give you some information on this, and so you'll know how to handle him, because he was becoming, what would you call it, a tyrant. Even at 18 months, mother was just following him around saying, what do you want? What do you want? And that could have led to some real problems if she didn't understand it. But just to see the relief in her face that it wasn't her fault. My friend's kid is so different than my why. What am I doing wrong? Your mothers always want to take that on, like somehow must be my fault.
I
But
think
it
it's,
isn't.
yes. I think it's interesting that you were looking at modalities and elements as you were scoring, and in relation to temperament, because I believe this is also a very traditional way of
Yes,
looking at temperament from an astrological perspective.
right. Yes, it's different than well, if we go back to the Greeks, I mean, they had their humors. You had your melancholy and your sanguine, etc. So there were 4 different types, but here we're dealing with 8 different components. So you can get different kinds of combinations. Some children may be what we call easy children. That's about 40% of children are easy children. They're happy mood. They're very adaptable when you move them around. They don't have a lot of energy in their emotions. They're kind of outgoing and smiling and easy to handle. And mom's got an easy baby. Okay. But what if you've got an easy child that's also highly persistent? The highly persistent child doesn't want to change whatever it is they're doing. So if mom says, we're going to go here, and the kid says, no, I want to finish this, then you're dealing with an element that the mother should be aware of, and saying, okay, you have to give this child warning before you're going to go somewhere. You have to allow him to finish what he's doing first, so he's satisfied, and then he'll be willing to go. So there's different ways of handling temperament, which is going to be beneficial for the child's development, because that's where your character comes from. Your temperament is kind of like your hardware, and your personality is kind of like your software. It develops in stages, but the basic temperament stays with you. It doesn't change a lot. I mean, as you go older, you can educate children and say, okay, well, we know you always overreact to something, so just calm down and just take some time and tell me what's wrong or what you're feeling. So you learn to deal with your temperament. I know I was a shy child. I've had to learn to deal with that. I never raised my hand in school. I would mumble the answer, and the kid in front of me would raise their hand. So temperament has a lot to do with how you develop, but you do understand yourself after a while if you really study it. But that's why it's so advantageous to give it to a parent and say, this is what you have. A persistent child or a distractible child, you have to treat totally different way.
The working as both a therapist and an astrologer, one of the things that I come across a lot is people whose childhoods were marred by being accused of being difficult one way or another, or naughty, and essentially what it boils down to is that they didn't,
Stubborn.
or stubborn's the other one, yeah, they didn't fit in with, I would say that they were not convenient children for the parents, because they differ from the parents' expectation as to what a child was, whether the expectations were reasonable or not. They didn't fit in, and a lot of the time they were not reasonable expectations necessarily, because the child was just being a child. And so in your book, you talk about the notion of a good fit, so that this temperament actually fits in with the environment that the child's being raised in. And I think that's so fundamental, because when it isn't, well, it's a disaster, isn't it? It
Yes.
creates so much tension and anguish.
Well, for instance, just environmentally, if you take that you have a highly active child, they're bouncing off the walls. And if you live in a small apartment, they're going to drive you crazy. So, like my grandson, he's that way. So, you have to get them out in the park. You have to get them out to run around. You can't let them sit for you can't expect them to sit for a long time in the car for a long drive. You have to stop periodically and let them get around and release all that energy. So yeah, so that's an environmental thing. But then you have the personal thing. So if you have, let's say you have a very athletic father who's looking forward to his little boy, playing football. He's probably already bought a football, and it turns out that this temperament and this child is more sensitive, um, more serious, more creative. He tends to go in a different way. And so his father's expectation is this child's going to be athletic, because I am and he's going to be. So right away, that there's going to be conflict. He's going to be angry because the child doesn't want to do all these things. But if he understands ahead of time that this child is more creative and needs to be introduced to music and art and things like that instead, then his expectations change. And therefore, the kid can relax and the father can relax. That's what I'm saying about a good foot.
There are many aspects of my work which I love, but working with parents to help them better understand their children, and using astrology for that is, in my mind, one of the most joyous things that I do, because it thrills me to see parents better understanding their children and actively developing strategies to improve things and help them out. So I am, so thrilled that you've written this book, and that it's, I think, a really fresh and lovely approach, which astrologers should have a look at, because it will help them when they're working with clients with children. But equally also, if you have a child or you're a grandparent, this is also for you. So Cornelia, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for interviewing me. I'm just really pleased to get my work out there, because you're right. The whole idea is to grow healthy, happy children. And I'm just thrilled when people use this and find that it works. I'm working with a girl. She has a face group of moms, conscious parenting through astrology. And that's what we do. We try to teach the mothers how to understand their child through astrology.
Can you repeat that again so that people can find you?
Oh, okay. The group is called, it's Facebook group. It's called Conscious Nurturing with Astrology. And she has like 700 mothers on her group. And so we have lots of tapes that we're developing to teach parents about their child. For instance, we did one on temperament. We did a tape on how to deal with your child's Mars. We've done Mercury, we've done learning styles, and at present we're working on one for Venus. So they get to know their child's chart as well as understanding the elements behind it and how it works. And I find that very satisfying when a mother says, "Oh, I never knew that. Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, it's amazing. You can just tweak your behavior with your child a little bit, and it has such an impact."
Oh yes, and you could see the parents' face light up as well. It's like, yes. Oh, that's what it's about. Or yes, I recognize that behavior. I recognize this. This is my child. So that's wonderful. And of course, the book that we have been discussing is Kid Wheels, and I'll put a link to that in the description box as well. And do you have a website that people can
No, I don't.
you don't? Okay. So the Facebook group is the best way to be in touch, and
Yes.
that's wonderful. Cornelia,
All right.
thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you all for watching. And next time we have a very special edition of Lightways with Victor Oliver looking at draconic astrology. And in the meantime, if you are interested in learning more about astrology, do check out my website. And I do have a great course on relationships and astrology coming up in June. So do get in touch if you're interested. Until then, goodbye.